All right, welcome to our AgrAbility National Training Workshop Encore webinars. Today's webinar is Communicating Economic Impacts of AgrAbility to Stakeholders. And our presenters today are Rebecca Hill and Alex Haig. For those of you who are not familiar with AgrAbility, it is a USDA-sponsored program that assists farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural workers with disabilities. It partners land-grant universities with disability service organizations, and there are currently 21 state projects and one national AgrAbility project, which is led by Purdue's Breaking New Ground Resource Center. Partners of the National AgrAbility Project are Goodwill, the Finger Lakes, and Washington State University. You can find more information about AgrAbility at www.agrability.org. Alex Haig is currently in the economics PhD program at Colorado State University, and his research is centered around climate, the environment, and public health policy. He is also an adjunct professor of economics and mathematics at Ames Community College in Greeley, Colorado. He has a master's in economics and a master's in statistics from the University of Colorado, and has a bachelor's in accounting from the University of Northern Colorado and a bachelor's in jazz studies from the University of Minnesota at Duluth. He enjoys fitness, gaming, gardening, and music, and he lives, and it is covered by I apologize, Alex, the rest of it is covered by the closed captioning, and I cannot see it.
No worries.
So I am going to stop my share and pass it on to you, Alex.
Thank you. Is Rebecca Hill in, possibly? Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Tess. Again, welcome. My name is Alex Haig. I'm a PhD candidate in the economics program at Colorado State University. And Rebecca was supposed to do this intro because I only started working with AgrAbility in January. But yeah, we'll kind of power through. So the motivation behind this was there's a lot of, as I'm pretty sure everyone on this webinar is aware, there's a lot of uncertainty around federal funding in general for programs in the United States. And really what resonates with many funding stakeholders is economic impact numbers. Like whether we like it or not, we got to think about where the money is coming from and what benefits federal dollars are going towards. So what this project is seeking to try to do is to come up with estimates of the economic impact of all of the various services that AgrAbility offers to its clients. Now, AgrAbility's been around for a long time, as Tess just talked about, so there's obviously tons of work that you guys have done already. There's been discussion of economic impacts and economic impact methodologies. So we've done some literature review, and there's been generation of lots of ideas. And the scope of this project could be very large. So there's a lot of different ways that AgrAbility has economic impacts, both like directly on the clients that we serve and indirectly on the communities and the industries in which the clients reside. So for this project, we're trying to boil it down into two general goals. First, we have to find a way to obtain some accurate measures of changes in farm or ranch economic activity specifically. And we really only have one major way to try to find these measures, and that's going to be done primarily through client surveys as well as some non-survey data collection. So when we're trying to think about the economic impact of the services AgrAbility provides its clients, we want to try to understand the mechanism through which those services flow into economic measures. So one mechanism we could think about is we would expect clients to see improvements in their ability to work on their farm or ranch after working with AgrAbility compared to before. That's sort of the point, I would argue, of AgrAbility's whole mission is to provide services and accommodations and modifications to agricultural workers in an effort to make quality of life better and make them able to continue to work on their farming and ranching or in their careers and in their jobs. We would also expect, because of the nature of the work itself, that accommodations should make working easier and or maybe possible once again if it was no longer possible. And because of this, we would expect improvements in a whole bunch of potential economic outcomes. So with some very high level research, because I'm confident many people on this webinar know a lot more about the economic impacts of agriculture related injuries than I do, at a high level, we're just trying to motivate the fact that this is a non-trivial exercise as well. Like the focus on quality of life is very important, but there are already economic negative impacts for injuries in the agricultural workforce. So per the University of Iowa College of Public Health, and this is a few years old, so I imagine this number is actually an underestimate, but following an injury, the average farm income is reduced by 30%, which is a pretty large proportion. And also nationally, the annual cost of agriculture injuries is approximately $8.3 billion. And that's almost entirely like the direct cost from lost wages to lost productivity to increased expenses to reduction in workforce and worker longevity, all these things. So this is coming out of the University of Iowa. Again, trying to really motivate this idea that the work that AgrAbility does is really, really good, and it is, from an economic standpoint, absolutely necessary. And how can we see the types of mitigating economic impact effects that the services AgrAbility provides its clients is causing? So these next two slides, Tess, I don't know, it sounds like based on your introduction that you want the Q&A to happen at the end, but we were sort of thinking about getting people in the webinar's feedback throughout the course of this presentation, because we're really trying to take the ideas that we're thinking about, trying to measure the economic impact. But my agricultural background is limited to only two areas. One, when I was a CPA in public accounting, doing crazy cattle farm inventory on December 31st in blizzards, and then in the forestry side of things. So we really want to rely on all of your guys' expertise in the field to sort of think about wording and timing and stuff. So do we still want to wait till the end?
We can do it however you want. If you want people to input during, we can have people raise their hand or type in the chat, and I can watch that as we go.
I would love that, because I know people can write down their questions and stuff on their own, but I know a lot of you guys are going to have probably some really, really relevant and salient ideas, so I want to make sure we hear whatever we can from people. So if that's okay, not too much of a burden for you running it, then I would really prefer that.
Yeah, not at all.
Awesome. So thank you so much. These next two slides, I was just trying to develop basically a visualization to think about how we're running this study, or like what we're thinking about the study in terms of how it's going to function when we're trying to measure these economic impacts. So first, we have sort of this 6-stage process, starting with whenever some sort of agricultural injury or something occurs, and a whole bunch of examples for why this could happen. Could be tractor accidents, right? Very frequently we have repetitive stress and repetitive strain injuries, injuries from livestock. There's tons of different reasons why a given client might come to seek AgrAbility services. But it all starts when there's some negative impact on the worker themselves. From that, we see any sort of reduction in economic factors, like maybe they're working fewer hours. Because of that, there could be reduced farm and ranch income or output or yields of whatever livestock or crop they're growing or managing. And then also like struggles with work and increased costs, maybe outsourcing labor elsewhere. Lots of negative potential and economic impacts from these injuries. Then that's at step 3 here, that's when our clients begin to work with AgrAbility. And when it comes to this project, that's our first point of getting data at the client level. We want to start with a pre-survey right when they come in the door and start working with AgrAbility. I know there's a lot of stuff that AgrAbility offices across the country are already doing, so we think this is, without making it too big of a like functional burden for clients, adding in just a handful of maybe some survey questions here, it's the perfect time to get information on maybe data that the clients have about what their themselves and what their farm or ranch was, how it was functioning prior to the injury, and then also currently in their pre-AgrAbility, but unfortunately post-injury situation. Then, as we all know at AgrAbility, there are many, many different services and approaches and needs that the clients may pursue. So as those mitigations and accommodations occur, I see there's a new thingy. Okay, sorry, Tess, that's just you. As these mitigations and accommodations occur, of all different types, they'll be working with AgrAbility and AgrAbility offices, and then as soon as they exit work with AgrAbility, that's when we want to do our post-survey, because there's a chance that we might not capture much or we might not capture anything in the time between pre-survey and post-survey, but uh, there is a chance that we could capture changes since the accommodations. And there's lots of positive impacts from AgrAbility's work, from hours worked, increases in income, recovering some of the lost productivity, and then continued farming and ranching. And then finally, especially this last one is where we want input. We definitely want some sort of follow-up survey looking at the longer-term impacts of AgrAbility services on the clients. I put a year later here because that seemed like a reasonable place to start, but we're very flexible on input here. And that'll help us try to capture maybe some sustained economic impact. Again, if we're thinking about trying to help stakeholders understand what the impact the funding has economically, the longer term impact looks at those types of things. So this is definitely a slide where we would love people's input. I see some stuff's coming in through the chat, especially like wording, timing, all of that stuff, or maybe stuff that I've completely ignored.
Okay, Tim, you're able to unmute yourself now if you had a question or a comment. No, you can't, or no, you don't have a comment. Oh, okay.
And I see Emily's comment.
Yeah.
Yes, completely agree. I know that there isn't direct services that AgrAbility provides. It's for lack of a better term, it's a broker, right, to find the services and needs. But I believe some offices, including Colorado State University's ones, directly provide some of the behavioral health stuff. So I wasn't sure which term to put in here, but thank you very much, Emily. I'm going to add that as a note in my notes.
Alec, you may be covering this in future slides, but are you planning to do a prototype of this in Colorado and then try to expand it, or what's your plan for how you're going to launch this?
Sure thing, Paul. That's a great question for Rebecca, but my understanding is, yeah, we'll pilot it, but we want to get as much input from all of the offices as we can because we want this to be a collaborative tool that we can all use and maybe eventually start getting like holistic data sets that we can all use. But yeah, the plan is to pilot it somewhere, I'm assuming in Colorado, maybe a handful of states. Rebecca will know specifically, and then maybe make some adjustments, improvements, iterate on the process, and then yeah, continue to roll it out.
And Emily had another comment. It says, typically we are asked what economic impact it has on our communities in which the clients live in because our VR offices try to buy locally when necessary. Will this also be shown?
Yes, Emily, it's a great question. So that's actually the original thing that I thought we were doing when Rebecca reached out to have me help her out with this. But again, you'll have to confirm with her. We're going to start with the client level, but definitely moving to the community level because there's extensive methodology and studies that we could really leverage once we have these sorts of measures. But yeah, I definitely agree. these two things should be going simultaneously. We should be looking at the individual farm, ranch, farmer, rancher, or owner-operator impact and the wider community, because all of this stuff is interrelated. And again, I want to repeat myself. I would love to answer questions better, but I honestly don't know Rebecca's full plans. She's my boss, and she's in charge. But yes, thank you, Emily. This is great. And I'll just take notes if there's any other questions.
I don't see anything else at this time.
Okay, we can always come back, but I will continue. Thank you so much. So that was kind of a map of the general process that clients go through as they have an injury, they come to AgrAbility, we match them with services, and then when they're done, hopefully there's some benefit, and then we can do a follow-up, and how our surveys are going to be slid in there. From the impact assessment itself, I've created this slide to sort of show how the questions we want to answer flow through to those surveys and the other supplementary data that I'll talk about in a bit, to sort of try to answer those questions. And these are really, we're going to go through the questions slide by slide coming up, but these are sort of condensed versions because there's already kind of a lot of text on this flow. So we started with really brainstorming on a bunch of research questions. And again, just like the previous slide, anyone have any questions, comments, ideas to either refine or correct stuff in this? Absolutely, that's what I want. We have sort of 6 broad research questions around economic impacts. First one has to do with regaining hours worked if a client has lost the number of hours they work either per day or per week. And then the second centers around the economic impacts of any secondary injuries, right? As many of us know, especially in agriculture, if there's a primary injury, if it isn't addressed or accommodated, that can very easily lead to additional secondary injuries, which themselves have economic impacts. And then 3 looks at changes in output and yield. You know, it could be gallons or bushels, whatever relevant measure we're thinking about for the particular farm or ranch. Related to that is question 4, looking at changes in income. And then question 5, looking at maybe reduction in the number of acres that are being utilized by a particular farm, or reduction in herd sizes because maybe the farmers or ranchers don't feel they're able to manage their full capacity with their injury. And then finally, this is something that very much interests me. As we are probably aware, there are many, many, many different types of injuries our clients experience, and coming up with a few broad but precise categories might yield differential economic impacts, right? Maybe repetitive motion and osteo or arthritic injuries respond very well economically to AgrAbility services, but maybe it turns out that amputees do not, or vice versa, right? We want to know if there are certain areas that are affected differently economically than others for sort of broad categories of injuries. From these research questions, if we want to answer them, we have to think about what types of measures we can get that will help us work towards answering questions around them. And that really brings us to 5 major economic measures, looking at hours worked. And like I mentioned in research question 1, it's not just like how many hours they're working, but also are they regaining any time that they may be lost post-injury. And then, of course, post working with AgrAbility. And of course, lost productivity, potential lost time injuries, like literally being unable to work for some amount of time, or sort of the cost of downtime from the injury itself. Then of course, we want to measure changes in output or yield, which really are changes in production. We want to measure changes in income because different farms, different ranches produce and sell different products, and those have different prices. So income can be different across those different types of farms and ranch. And then finally, looking at really changes to the scale of the operations themselves. Like I mentioned, we could have reduction in acreage, reduction in head of cattle or whatever livestock the particular ranch is tending. So we really want to measure that as well. So those 5 sort of broad measures capture the 6 different things that we're looking at in our research questions. We have our questions. We have some economic measures that we think if we can obtain data on them, we can answer or start to answer these questions. So from that, we get to our data collection. And these 3 are just like the previous slide, right? We have our pre-survey, also our baseline. That happens right when a client begins working with AgrAbility. Gives us sort of baseline metrics. For example, like the hours worked data. We can collect pre and post working with AgrAbility. Post-survey, again, right after they finish working directly with AgrAbility, this could potentially see if there are immediate results coming out of the work that AgrAbility does for its clients. We can't really know if that's going to be large or small, if it's more relevant to certain injury types to others, certain farms or ranch types to others. And then finally, of course, the follow-up survey. And again, if anyone has any suggestions on whether or not the 1 year after working with AgrAbility timing is good, bad, or if they have a different idea, obviously totally on board with that. And from that, we have our data. We're going to supplement it with a bunch of data. We have like the extensive client records from like the annual demographics, summary, business structure, grant history information. We also have a bunch of supplementary data sets at the state and national level from the USDA, NASS. There's industry benchmarks, potentially relevant Schedule F fund information from tax returns. We're going to integrate all of that with our surveys and hopefully get some results, do some final analysis. And going back to your point, Paul, then we're going to iterate on it. Even if we scale this up to every state that has an AgrAbility office in it, we are going to want to continue to refine this as best we can. So anyone have any questions or comments about sort of the idea, the concept around how we're designing this economic impact assessment?
So Art says for each type of injury, there are defaults as far as the monetary loss of earnings that economist courts use.
Oh, so this is like for lawsuit at fault stuff. That makes a lot of sense. Or is this just like statistical actuarial averages, Art?
It says especially when insurance companies are involved.
Yeah, that makes sense. Or like, I could definitely see it being used in the court. Apologies for my dog in the background. Definitely see that used in courts, and like you said, when insurance is involved. But are you also saying that there are like average cost of like loss of primary upper limb sort of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll unmute you. Hang on a second.
Perfect.
Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself now, Art.
Thanks. Yeah, so for a number of purposes, law firms will and insurance companies will hire people who are permanently disabled. Maybe a guy lost his foot and on the job. And so the insurance companies are interested in terms of an amount that they can then calculate by percentage of disability and by whatever that default is, what the person can't make anymore. And so sometimes it's individualistic. Sometimes insurance companies or lawyers will hire economists to expert work. But an economist who I've worked and was trained with in graduate work and have worked with many years ago, he ended up just as a gig. He would teach here at the university as adjunct, but he did pretty well by working with those numbers. So I don't know that there's an association of, injury criteria, monetization that has those in a table online or anything like that. But I know that both insurance companies have kind of a basic table, or maybe not a table, but have maybe intervals that they work with ranges. and also lawyers do too. And then in real specific cases, like I say, they'll actually hire economists to look at that particular, depending on the physiological interplay of, this being affected and that being affected. But for just the basic stuff, I don't know how amenable taking those numbers and then figuring them in would be for farm work. I would think that maybe the FSA might be familiar with those numbers because farmers, as you mentioned, they're independent businessmen. They're small businesses, right? And it might be the FSA even knows where to get some of the really straightforward type of tables that are used in this kind of work when working with agriculture injuries. I don't know. Because the FSA works a lot with insurance, right? Or at least can refer people to different types of insurance, which disability must be a part of that, I would think, besides just crop insurance.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, might not apply to whole groups of clients potentially, but when it does, like your amputee example makes a lot of sense, right? If there's any sort of insurance claim or settlement or anything, comparing what we're gathering with what those measures are could be a very interesting question in itself, and I think that's relevant. But I'm also thinking like, is insurance going to pay for some of the, like maybe some of the older clients who have been working for 30, 40, 50 years and have arthritis, right? And may have not made claims or something like that. I'm not familiar with this, but no, this is really, really good, Art. I like this a lot. Thank you.
Well, the other thing,
Taking notes.
sure, and in the Red River Valley, we used to do economic impact mostly in farm towns, and it was mostly on the businesses. When Walmart moved in, what was the economic impact on the local shoe store and stuff like that? Um, you know, that's mostly where we had focused the economic impact. But I will say that there are large enough operations, especially when you get into soybeans, sugar beets, and corn. And by red, I don't mean the Texas Red River Valley, but between North Dakota and Minnesota, that you have some fairly large operations where you have employment of ag workers, right? So the farmer himself might be more of a manager and they may have ag workers. A lot of the ag workers in Red River Valley used to be seasonal, but now and used to be migrant workers. That was just a part of the culture. But now, in the last several decades, a lot of them have stayed and put down roots. Well, there must be ways in which, when you get injured at work, because the farmer is an employer now of maybe 20 farm hands
Yep.
that are maybe seasonal, but they're permanent employees. There might be, that might be a resource too, because of those farm workers having repetition injuries, that kind of thing for picking or whatever
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
is ailing them. So that might be a consideration, and then I'll be quiet, I promise, Tess, and then you can cut me off with the mute. But the other thing that might be also worth looking at is the American Office on Aging has economic impact on, in general, in macro, of various caregivers and the toll that it takes on caregivers to prop up a spouse or a family member, And so it just might be that in cases where you have maybe a farmer who's making it, but can't use his lower limbs or whatever, and is getting quite a bit of that's kind of the unsaid economic pickup that often we don't know about is the spouse
Yeah.
on farms, right? Because it is a dual thing and one just probably couldn't do it alone, but there's not an income statement for the spouse. But
Right.
the National Family Caregiver Association has kind of a way that they've worked out economic impact and whether you can ginny that up specifically to a family business like farming. I don't know, they may be of some help and calculate what the loss of earnings are for the caregiver who would otherwise be working in town 20 hours a week if they could, but they can't because they're helping the injured, spouse run the farm. Okay, I'm all done, Tess. Sorry.
That's perfect.
That's okay, Art.
See, Emily, thank you, Art. That was great. Took a lot of notes. Maybe add some either qualifier to one of the questions. You guys will see it later on about like if like we have a question about are you hiring outside additional labor because you're unable to work, right? And maybe add something in there that's something like, is a family member or spouse doing something? Because again, trying to get at um, like they have this reduction in economic, a whole bunch of economic measures. We're trying to see how the work that AgrAbility does is able to either like ameliorate or maybe if we're really fortunate, really completely reduce those negative economic impacts. But no, Art, this is really, really good. Emily, I see your question. Uh, I want to answer this, but I don't know it specifically because this is another Rebecca question. But what my whole push, well, both Rebecca and my whole push for this is we want to add as little additional workload, not just to the clients, but also to AgrAbility workers. So there are some it's my understanding that there is some sort of intake survey stuff going on already for clients. So this would be just like a handful of questions added on to that, if that makes sense. And then,
And along with that, just to let you know, with the current demographic data that we're collecting, only about 42% of the clients are answering questions related to their financial condition. So I think you may run into that issue when you try to gather more information, that you're going to have reluctance on the part of the clients to share. It might be interesting to find out or try to find out whether it's the people that earn the least that are reluctant or the most that are reluctant, or if there's no real pattern to that. But I think, like I said, you're going to need to think about that and also probably provide some training to staff about how, best to try to approach the clients in trying to get that type of information. Because, like I say, it's not a majority that are sharing that at this point, and that's only one question. They're only asking about the basic income range, and still you're not getting a lot of people willing to share.
yeah, yeah, and like everyone is agreeing in the chat, that's exactly the type of stuff that like Rebecca and other workers at AgrAbility have informed me. Like it, not identical, but similar in the forestry stuff that I've done before. Like just like Angie's saying here at the end, farmers are very private. We're recognizing that, and that's kind of partly why we're sharing these questions with you today. Maybe some of you may have some ideas, and if ideas come up later, of course, you can email Rebecca, or well, you should email her. Don't email me. I just work here, but definitely email Rebecca, and we can chat about those types of things because that's definitely something like a perennial challenge, and we're expecting very low survey returns initially until we can maybe work on some of this stuff. Yeah, Tegan, this is kind of like the idea that we're doing. We're planning on rolling it out, so probably just in Colorado for a little bit, seeing different phrasings, different types and quantities of questions, and then um, continuing to connect with the other AgrAbility offices, seeing what we're getting, and then trying to expand it across AgrAbility nationally, if possible. But exactly right. This is really cool stuff. So would love to work with you as well. But no, Paul, that's a great point that we are aware of potentially very low return rates, and just have to work on that. Oh yeah, I believe it's like 2 weeks or something, Tegan, something like that. So I'll let Rebecca know that you're excited to get started. Any other questions on sort of this general design? I'm reading Art's question. Yeah, so that's actually a separate problem, which I think is also still interesting question to ask, right? If Art's saying in Minnesota, State Department of Revenue gets business tax amounts, could be aggregated, but the code, the NAICS code is voluntary and chosen by the farmer. So like there could be some measurement error. We also know that sometimes the reporting, self-reporting is either um, inflated or deflated for various reasons in all industries. So understanding how that functions within our clients and within ag, of course, is also a non-trivial and important question to answer. And anything we publish, and I'm not just saying like research journal, but like the functional stuff that we want to get out of this is going to have to be explicit about that point. Okay, I think I only have like 23 more minutes, so I'm going to try to go through the main things I really want to talk about in the next few slides here, but feel free to keep sending questions. So here broadly are our research questions. These are not the survey questions. I am going to sort of read through these briefly. Feel free to make comments, but we really want to get to the survey questions in this webinar because you guys have been giving great feedback. I would love some more, but definitely if you have comments on this stuff, feel free to put in the chat or email Tess or Rebecca or myself, of course. So first question, what effect does AgrAbility services have on regaining hours worked per week for clients who previously had reduced ones? So that should be pretty straightforward. Number two is looking at the economic impacts and the reduction of secondary injuries after using AgrAbility. Third is changes as output and yield. Fourth is farm ranch income. Fifth and sixth, in my opinion, are the more interesting ones for me personally, just because as a researcher. So does a given farm or ranch now utilize more acres or have increased herd sizes as a result of working with AgrAbility? And then what are these sort of differential or heterogeneous economic impacts based on general injury types? And this is just like high level. We'll dig into this once we start looking at the data a little bit more, but like category like a limb loss or osteo, respiratory, TBI, those types of things. So these are just the research questions driving this sort of impact analysis process. There's a whole bunch of existing measures that we're definitely going to incorporate. So like AgrAbility already collects a bunch of stuff from like most of this is from that demographic survey data that I was taking a look at. We have like disability types and causes, and I'm using disability because that's the term in the survey. I know that's not necessarily the term I would want to use here, but that's just the information that's in there. The demographics information, we have days worked off of the farm and ranch. As many of you are probably very aware, there's a decent proportion of our clients are veterans, so that's important. The type of farming classified enterprise, and then household income. But again, as Paul mentioned on the existing question, it's ranges, so it's not exact, and we don't have really good returns on that information. And then of course county, because we want to keep in mind both the state and county level, maybe legal structure, and sports services or lack thereof. And then we have our three basic hypotheses. So first is that ag workers may be overcompensating for reduced work, efficiency, or productivity due to their injury or limitation. And that increases the probability of secondary injuries, as I talked about previously. Our second hypothesis is that because of the injury or limitation, individuals have reduced efficiency, and that could result in unintended calf loss or similar loss in other animals, or suboptimal maintenance of the cultivated land for farms. And then finally, reductions in productivity, and it could be also with acreage or herd sizes, that's going to result in lowering farm output, yield, and income. So all these different measures are kind of the hypotheses we have guiding this research. We have our 5 main measures of economic impact, just like on that flow diagram. We have hours worked, output yield, income, productivity, acres and head. And at the bottom of these, like, do any of you know, are we collecting any of these measures already? Or like, should we consider including others given the type of questions or the type of research questions we're trying to answer? These are like the 5 big ones. Like we started with like a list of 15 and then we've been paring them down. But if anyone has any ideas on other economic measures. It looks like Paul might.
On the current demographics, we're collecting a range of hours worked, but not specific hours worked.
Yeah, so like definitely we'll be using that data, and hopefully we can merge them together, or like see if there's like differences showing up when we do these potential survey questions. So that's really good. But I mean, Schedule F, if there is any of it from anyone and we get the releases, that's potentially a place we could get income out of. Yeah. If anyone has any other ideas, feel free to throw them in the chat. There's a bunch of data sources from tax documentation, which we may or may not have for a given client, and the surveys that we're going to be collecting, as well as supplemental data sets. I see Emily has mentioned something. I asked some of those questions to better understand our clients and have for their reports to send to VR and make the recommendations. Our VR takes Schedule F. Yeah, that's excellent. That's really good to know, Emily. But that's only for VR clients, right? Or is that for all your clients? Oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense. Sorry. And Emily, do you know about how long you've been gathering that data for your clients? Roughly. Doesn't have to be precise. You could be typing a very large thing, and that's great. I am going to continue since we don't have a lot of time, but I definitely want to talk more about that, Emily. That's really great that you're already getting that information. Like I mentioned, and as Emily's sort of talking about, we can use Schedule F to look at baseline farm ranch income prior to clients engaging in our services, particularly for the viability study. And then this is a very valuable source of farm level data because we are not necessarily going to be able to independently confirm farm level information. That works. Okay. Oh, wow. Oh, that's great. Perfect. Thank you, Emily. That's good to know. I'm just taking some notes quick. All right. So for the survey, which is sort of the purpose of what we're talking about today, thanks, Emily. That's nice to know that you're in Nebraska. I've got to write that down. That is non-trivial detail. Most of the data we're going to have is going to have to come from surveying the clients. So the questions we need to make are going to be asked before they begin and after they finish working with AgrAbility. And as I mentioned, ideally, we do want that third survey to go out maybe a year, or of course, if anyone has input on a better timing to look at these longer term impacts. So we have survey questions. For the most part, they're going to be identical pre and post. I think there's one, maybe two that have slight differences, which should be clear why. But what I would like, if we can, is people to consider when evaluating the people in the webinar today, looking at these questions, do we think it actually gets us the measure that we want? Do we think, and we already don't really, but do we think clients will be receptive to answering the given question? Maybe should it be worded differently, or what other questions could we potentially consider? So our first one is very simple. How many hours per week do you work on your farm or ranch? So we're kind of straightforward, trying to see like labor time spent changes. And I'll just kind of give a little bit, see if anyone has any thoughts or concerns. Thanks, Paul, for the thumbs up. I don't have the whole thing up, so if anyone else is doing any reactions, I can't see. Nice. Yeah, I originally had on average, but is that, I'm wondering if, I mean, I could say on average, but I wasn't sure if that was like good, like easy enough, not easy enough, but like not snobby enough wording, like maybe typically. Yeah, okay, seasonal harvest, that's good, that's good. Yeah, you both, we have a consensus. Okay, that's really good. So either average, some sort of time constraint like last 30 days, seasonal considerations. That's really good. Okay, yeah, right. Could be crop, livestock. Um, Excellent. All right, feel free to put more comments or questions in here. I'm going to keep going just because we don't have a lot of time left. So second one, uh, pre-survey would be, has your injury affected your farm's or ranch's annual output? And then like bushels, head, gallons, etc. And then post would be, how has interactions with AgrAbility specifically, how has your interactions with AgrAbility affected your farm or ranch's annual output? Again, with the same sort of general sample measures. This one's a little tough because we're trying to balance like specificity. Yeah, exactly, Christina. So like, or second, Christina Miller. Um, yeah, well, yep, and I do have a typo in there. First, Christina, thank you. Yeah. Follow up with a fill in the blank to give some sort of specific amount. It's really good. All right, I'm going to move to the next one. Yeah, so trying to narrow it down so that the post survey says something like, how has it changed, and like really trying to do AgrAbility specific, but could pull that out. But we do kind of want to try to make sure it's linked up some way with the services that AgrAbility is connecting them with. But okay, potentially simplifying the post. Question, change to modification. Okay, and then I see Kyle is a big thing. Yeah. So like considering case studies for clients willing to share. Yeah, Christina, that's what we're kind of hoping, right? On average. Yep. Sorry, I'm not reading everything out loud to everyone. Just trying to keep things moving. No, but Kyle, this is really good. I made a note of this as well. That case studies, they may not give us the statistical power we want, but they could give us very much non-trivial information. Okay, I'll move to the next one. Farm income is very simple, right? What is your farm's, ranch's annual income? As Paul mentioned, and all of you repeatedly said, they probably won't share this, but maybe they will. And then like someone was mentioning training the personnel going out in maybe different ways to try to convince them that this isn't like anything punitive or whatnot, or the fact that they're private. We want to respect that, but if we can find some ways to get this information. Okay, Emily, that's good to know. Very good. And then yeah, for this farm income, potentially could confirm for some subset of clients on the Schedule F. So it'll be the same question. This one will be pre and post, is what we're thinking, Angie. As much as I can, I didn't want to change the pre and post questions. Okay, potentially consider piloting ranges of income. Which, yeah, Christina, that's similar to what Paul mentioned is already being asked. So that's a very good idea. Thank you so much. Okay, enjoy my dog in the background a little bit more. Okay, and then again, like before, this will be the same before and after. So like how many acres do your farm or how many head of livestock do you ranch currently? Oh, I do have a typo there, I see that. Embarrassing, but that's okay. Oh, I'm going to add that up to this one, Christina. Thank you. ERS farm income as benchmarks. Right. And that's at like the county level, or do they have like a tract level or something, I think. So we can definitely compare that as well. But ideally, we would want to try to get a little bit of self-reporting on these surveys so we can get individual level. But yes, looking at the benchmark income information is definitely relevant. But yeah, and like before, this question about acreage and herd, it would be the same before and after. We would see if there was any sort of change. Of course, relevant to previous statements some of you made, would have to take into account seasonality depending on the timing of when these surveys go out, or like the differences in crop or livestock that their farm or ranch uses. And then, okay. So do you feel like you need to compensate for your injury/limitation by working more hours, cutting back on herd acreage, or hiring outside labor? And then Art, your point here about the sort of unseen, uncompensated labor or unmeasured economic impact of like spouses and family member caregivers. Would be really good here. Also have to include a caveat on leased, rented, and owned. Ooh, yeah, that's very good, Christina. Very, very good. Let me make a note of that. Right, because that, like, lumping farms who outright own their property versus those that are leasing or renting, like, is that they're facing different economic structures. That's really, really good. Thank you. And then the last one, have you lost livestock or crops due to being unable to adequately tend to them because of your injury? This one, we haven't come up with the post that we want to do for sure, but something like has like the loss rate or something like that recovered at all in the sense working with AgrAbility. Yeah, something like that, exactly. Back to pre-injury production levels. Of course, I'm not sure if I want to use injury. I know I've used it a couple times here, but maybe that is the correct wording. Whatever you guys think. This is definitely not my field of expertise. It's really good. Okay, so those are like the 6 main questions. Before reading this slide, pre-intervention. Perfect. Pre-intervention. Roberto, Alex, I probably missed it. Yeah, so that's a very, very salient point, Roberto. We've got, I know Colorado, I assume the other offices have done stuff as well, but the Colorado AgrAbility office has done a lot of quality of life work. So those questions are definitely relevant here as well. So, and like there are direct and indirect economic impacts of like mental health. So, total behavior. Right. That's very, very important, right? Especially like We've talked about this population is very private. They're also very proud of their work, which makes sense. So potentially the recovery, the emotional recovery, being able to do their work again could have very non-trivial impacts, positive impacts on economic measures as well. Okay, very good. People, feel free to keep sending stuff. This is really, really good. So again, coming back to this question about, does anyone have any thoughts on what might be the best timing for the post/after survey timing, right? Because we don't want to go too early, because some clients with some modifications the impacts might not have like manifested yet, or too late, and either maybe the client might not be confident that it's their work with AgrAbility that helped, something like that. 1 year from a closure. Yeah, Christina, it would be nice to do a fourth one. I don't know how annoying that would be for this population. Follow up at 3 years out. 3 years out. All right, we'll start with, I think, unless people really feel otherwise, like Emily's saying, we'll start with 1 year after the closure with AgrAbility, and then maybe we can do a 3-year post. Yeah. And what's nice about waiting till year 3 is, like, when we roll this out, we're going to have to wait time anyways. Yeah, and exactly, Christina, right. We don't want to go too early, and like whatever intervention or modifications have been incorporated by the client, they may not be getting the impacts, or maybe it's severe in the beginning recovery, and then maybe it stabilizes, or maybe it builds a little, right? So it's going to be conditional on seasonality and the crop type or livestock type and the injury type, all that stuff. So I think those are very good points. We only have a couple minutes left, and I don't know how close to the end you want me to go, Tess.
I mean, you've got a couple more minutes if anybody's got more questions.
Right. I think I will. I'm just going to really quick look. Yeah, that's it. And then I just have some of the external data sets. This is not an exhaustive list of the stuff that we're looking at, but just some of the data sets we're looking at. But I'm going to put thank you up here, but and I really do, I thank everyone for listening to me just kind of blather on and on this Zoom. But any other questions, comments, definitely want to hear them, because as many of you from different states have already pointed out, this is important, and we want to create a version of the survey that's like powerful and precise enough and good enough that we can hopefully start gathering data at the national level across all the AgrAbility offices, because everyone's doing really important work, and we should be advocating for the funding, because this is really important stuff.
One technical issue that needs to be clarified is whether each individual AgrAbility project is going to need to go through their university's IRB in order to be able to collect this data, because you're collecting sensitive information about people's incomes and storing it someplace. It's not going directly to you. It's going to be stored someplace by the state project.
Yep.
And there's some confusion, I think, at this point about the quality of life survey and the necessity of the states getting IRB approval individually for that survey. So I think we definitely need to make sure that that's clarified before this one's launched.
Yep. And that's actually something I've been chatting with Rebecca about as well. So very important. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, because it depends. Like the effect, depends on what happens, right? If each of you needs to go through your respective universities, or maybe some do, some don't, or if none of the offices do, right? That's very important before we roll out anything, so we can get our approvals in order as they're necessary. Thank you, Paul. That's great. All right, I don't want to keep people over. I already have, so I apologize. Kent, I see your comment. Yeah, exactly. And that's what we want to do, Kent, is like we want to make it very clear what we're doing, what we're asking, why we're asking for it, and like what it's going towards, right? Oh, that's a good idea, Christina. I'm just copy pasting whole comments and questions right now. This is good stuff. Oh, this is amazing. First, I was worried there wasn't going to be many people, and then there was a ton. Love that. And then I was worried people wouldn't be participating, just because, not judging you guys. I just know webinars sometimes don't have a lot of participation. So this has been amazing. Thank you, Christina. I copy and pasted that bad boy. All right, Tess, I will walk away from the microphone so I don't keep people over any longer.
All right. Well, Alex, thank you very much for sharing all that information. Like you said, there was lots of participation, and I think everybody's excited to see where this can go. For everybody else who's still on, don't forget that when you exit the webinar, there will be a few short survey questions. If you could quickly answer those for our feedback, that would be great. All right.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.